Hey book friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to a video that I make every year, end of the year, when I am reflecting on my reading year. How did my reading year go? And so I have a list today of the books I really disliked. So my worst books of the year, as well as books that kind of land in that really disappointed category. So worst and disappointed, I guess they're kind of the same thing, but those are the books I'm talking about in today's video. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel if you're new here, or welcome back if you've been coming for a while. So like I said, worst books of 2022. That's what this video is about. And honestly, there weren't that many because 2022 has been one of my best reading years. I think maybe the best one since I've been on BookTube, and it's coming on like 3 years. So for this channel, the Angie Henderson channel, I'm coming on 1 year of just dedicating a channel to books, which is exciting, but I've been sharing book content for about 3 years. And I would say this past year, 2022 has been the best year. And I will talk a bit about my thoughts on why this has been my best year. And I'm not sure if that video is coming out before this one or after this one, but I'm going to be talking about my reflections on 2022 as well as my goals for 2023. So look for that video. If it's up or not, I'm not quite sure. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about my least favorite books. And I only have 6 books on this list. Plus I think 1 DNF. I believe I only DNF'd 1 book this year. So I guess 7. We'll throw that DNF in here because it's not going to get its own video. And I scooted over because I don't have any of these books to hold up because I don't have them, or I'm trying to sell them. They might be in my pile for Pango, which I link my shop down below if you're interested in any of these books. Check it out. But I will start this with my DNF. Like I said, I just had the one, and so it was Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. Oh my gosh, this book, I don't know if it was just when I picked it up or when I was reading it, because sometimes that does matter. It matters what's going on in life as to how I'm able to handle a book. But I don't feel like I need to say too much about this book. It's pretty popular. It's about this woman who kind of has a mental breakdown, basically. She seemingly had a perfect life, a perfect husband, perfect career, all these things, until one day she is found in her home having shot her husband like 6 times in the face, and then she won't talk. And so she is obviously in prison, and there is a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist who is curious about her case, and he is trying to get to the bottom of what happened and trying to get her to talk. That's just the general premise. Why I did not like this book was because it just felt so messed up. Like every person in this book, like the way they saw the world, the way they processed what was going on was just really messed up. I thought maybe I would really like the psychotherapist, like he would just be an interesting character and that he would just have all these good intentions and all of this stuff. And I just found him and his life, which was shared entirely too much in this book, like all his backstory, his wife, all this stuff was just not very entertaining to me. And it was just kind of very blah. Like he was not a favorite character. So I know I'm going to read books where I don't like the characters. But I have a tough time reading books where I don't like any of the characters. Like there's nobody I can root for. There's no like police detective or psychotherapist in this case where I'm just like, oh, he's a good guy. I really want him to get to the bottom of this. No, like I dislike this character so much. And then you throw in the woman who killed her husband, and her inner thoughts as well as the flashbacks in her life were also just like psychologically heavy. I guess I'm not quite sure what to call it other than I just did not appreciate it. So I was reading this and I was hating it. And then I was wondering why everybody liked it. And then I was like, why am I reading this? So I just stopped. I don't often DNF, obviously. I only DNF'd 1 book this year because I usually pick books that I know I'm going to like. And I've talked about this on my channel that I have realized that I do not like psychological thrillers. And this is like the epitome of psychological thriller. So I just called my sister and asked how the ending went. She told me. I was like, okay, good. I'm moving on. So I really dislike this book. So Silent Patient, the only DNF of 2022. But to move to the ones I made it all the way through but didn't like. The first one is The Perfect Wife by DJ Palmer, I believe. I read this as part of a group read, buddy read sort of thing. And I like group read, buddy reads because oftentimes it exposes me to books I would not pick up, like this book. And some of the times that's awesome. I find new books. And some of the times it's like this where I'm just like, oh, that was a complete waste of time. I did not connect to the characters. It's basically about this woman who wakes up from an accident. It's been like 5 years and she doesn't know who she is. Her husband's there. He is informing her of who she was, like what kind of person she was, what did she like. He is the person who runs this like tech company, he's just this like tech genius. But yet she starts to remember some stuff or put together some facts from external sources or things like that that tells a different story, that tells a rather peculiar story. And I don't want to spoil it, and I feel like I might have in a previous video because I just assumed this basic plotline was well known, but I just looked up the synopsis and it's not in there. So I'm trying to keep it a little bit less informative, but that kind of ruins my ability to rant on this book because I did not like the direction it went. I did not like all the things she learned. I felt like women in general in this book were just put down, or the value of women was seen in more of like the sexual direction than anything else. And that trope just really drives me nuts when a book really marginalizes women and puts them down. And so I just didn't like the book. I don't recommend it. Don't read it. I gave it maybe 2 stars. And if I gave it 3, I might change it to 2 stars, which for me is pretty much as low as it gets. So The Perfect Wife by DJ Palmer. I didn't like it. Moving on to a historical fiction book I didn't like. Okay, so I liked parts of this book. So this book falls in a different camp than the last 2 I've talked about, which I just hated. This book is The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. You guys, I've talked about this on my channel before. I know this is an unpopular opinion on this book, especially a historical fiction book that a lot of people loved. I liked the general storyline where it's basically about this family, this Jewish family that was living, I think, in Paris or London, one of those. And then World War II starts and they're needing to get out of town. And the dad is captured and taken away. And then it's just the mom and the daughter, and they're fleeing for safety. And then the daughter, I don't believe is that old. And then she somehow gets roped into some resistance type work, which I liked all of that. What I could not stand about this book, and I'm not sure why, I just could not get over this, is I could not stand the relationship between the mother and the daughter. I could not stand the character of the mother. She was so manipulative and terrible to her daughter. And even though I know like it's character that was like undergoing some serious emotional things, and usually I can try to have sympathy for a character like that, I just couldn't. I felt like she was above and beyond where she should have been. I feel like there was like the adult and the like, she wasn't a child. I feel like she was like early 20s or late teens or something like that. And I felt like they were flipped on their ability to handle their emotions and protect each other and things like that. And it just brought so much hardship on this poor young girl who was just trying to figure out what to do in an impossible situation. And so I just couldn't get past that. And I feel like there are often books where I don't like characters. And this one it just got me. The portrayal of the mother, and the mother being so selfish and manipulative towards the daughter with very little redemption come the end. I just couldn't get past it, even though the other parts of the story were really good and I really appreciated them, and I thought they were well written. And so in light of that, the fact that I did like certain storylines, I do plan to give Kristen Harmel another shot, but I can't recommend this book, at least for me and where I was at the time of reading this. I just disliked it. So that's a historical fiction. All right, so for another psychological thriller that I strongly disliked this book, it's Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. All right, what I have learned, like I said, is I don't like psychological thrillers, and maybe it's a subset of psychological thrillers, but the kind where you spend the whole time in the mind of a character that just has ridiculous thoughts and just believes terrible things or is very manipulative of the people around them, and just generally a bad human being is how it kind of comes out, where they're just treating other people terribly, they're treating themselves terribly, they have low self-esteem, their inner monologue is just depressing to listen to. That's how this book went, because it's basically about this woman who wakes up from a car accident, so kind of similar to The Perfect Wife, but she has like her husband and her sister at her bedside table, and she can hear them, but she can't talk, so she's kind of paralyzed. And through listening to them, she's worried that maybe one of them put her in this hospital bed. And then you go back in time. You go back to kind of right before the accident. So what was going on in her life? What was she doing? Things like that. And then you go back to her childhood. So I did think the twist was clever. Okay, I did. Like, that's the hard part about some of these books, is the twists are often clever, but to get there, I feel like you have to endure all this just kind of nastiness and all these things that I just don't want in my head. So in the end, I'm trying not to read psychological thrillers. I have a tough time identifying what psychological thrillers have that kind of a trope where the main characters are just terrible people and they think terrible things. So I really dislike this book so much. So that is on the worst books of the year list for sure. Another one is another historical fiction. And so this was The Lost Girls of Paris. And this is by, I'm blanking on the name, and I'm not sure why because it's a pretty popular author. But this was the first one I read by her. And this is the one that seems that a lot of people love. And I really didn't like it. I really didn't. I felt like it didn't make much sense. And so it was about this time frame during World War II where there was this kind of special branch of the government that was sending out women as spies. So they were sent out as like radio operators and different things into Nazi occupied territory, and they were part of the resistance. And so it follows that being set up. It follows a number of different women being trained up and all this. What I had the problem with this book was not so much the storyline. I think that sounds really interesting, and I do like spy books, especially with women. So I thought this was going to knock it out of the park for me, but it didn't. It didn't because I felt like it was unrealistic. I felt like the main character had a daughter, like a 5-year-old daughter, who she just kind of ditched with like a neighbor or something. I can't remember who she left her daughter with. And then she went on this like adventure. And the justification was that she's trying to make the world better for her daughter, which I get, but I don't feel like I know any mothers who would just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to ditch my child to go fight for the resistance. Yes, fighting against evil is an important thing, but I don't feel like that portrayed a mother very clearly. And then there's like a romance thrown in there, and it just did not feel realistic. It did not make sense to me. I would have much preferred the main character be written as like a single girl than a single mother with no husband with a small child. It just didn't make sense. So I did not like that book. All right, so we're just going to bounce back to another psychological thriller. So in this case, I despise this book. So I did technically finish it, but I would say I skimmed the second half, like just for major plot points. I did not want to read it anymore. And it was Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how much I hated this book. Like, I was just kind of disturbed by it, which really, I know that was the point of the book. It was trying to be a disturbing book, and it qualified. And it was about this woman who is in seemingly a perfect marriage, that she has the best husband, a beautiful house, all of these things. But there are some things that are peculiar, and people are like, why can she not go out with her friends without her husband? Or if she does leave the house, she can't even have a purse. She can't even have a pen. Like, so it sounds like there's something amiss, but yet she doesn't appear that way. She appears like everything's fine and she has a perfect life. And then you start to get into her backstory and what's going on. And it was just so twisted. And I know it was an interesting twist. And again, I commend the author on their creativity. I feel like it was a well played out story. I just found the story to be very icky, very icky. Like, I don't want those thoughts in my head. I don't want to think about people potentially being like this. And hopefully that's not the case. But it just felt so like evil and gross that I just don't like that. And I've learned that I don't like that. And it is totally fine. That's just my taste in thrillers. And I have officially learned that this year. And because of that, it has changed some things in my reading life, as well as my book goals. And so again, look for that video if I have put it up on the channel already, because this idea is very much something I have learned in 2022. But that's not the last one. The last book on my list of worst books of the year, I feel like this one almost didn't make the list because it wasn't worst book, not like the way I despise a lot of these other books. This one I would call disappointing. That's the best way to describe this. I feel like the other ones I would call like worst books. Like they just leave me with like upset feelings. I don't know how to best to put it. So I really dislike those books. And this one didn't necessarily do that. I was just disappointed. I felt like it would be better. And so I read The Witch Haven by Sarah Peyton Smith. I'll put it up. And there were parts that were really good. So it's a historical fantasy book about this girl kind of in turn of the century who's down on her luck. She's working at this tailor shop. And then one night she accidentally kills a man using magic and she thinks she's going to prison. But yet there's these women that show up on her doorstep and take her to a school of magic, a school of witches. And they try to teach her her craft, which in and of itself was pretty good. I liked that part. It just, once it kind of shifted to her also trying to figure out what happened to her brother because he went missing prior to like the start of this book. And so once she was drawn down that path and different things happened, I feel like I just got a little disappointed. I felt like there was a lot of glaring plot holes or conveniences in the book that just didn't make sense. Like they would be caught somewhere and it was like not a big deal, when the whole book they were just trying to make out the idea that this would be a big deal, or these people are really mean and really evil, and then they're just like, oh, never mind, not a big deal, go ahead, go about your way, whatever it is. And so I just felt like the stakes were seemingly high but not actually high. And then I realized it was a YA book, and I think that was part of it. And I just wish I would have realized it was YA prior to reading it. I need to pay more attention. That's kind of on me. But I was a bit disappointed with this book. So I'm adding that to this video. So this video includes DNFs, worst books, as well as a disappointing book of the year. So those 7 books just were not the best. And honestly, that's not too bad. I am not sure where I'm going to end up this year. Probably like 55 books or something like that. So 7 out of 55 is really pretty good. I looked through the rest of my list and I definitely have some 3 stars in there still, but I still like those books as opposed to these books. So anyway, that is my list for worst books of the year. Let me know down below what you think of the books I talked about. Hopefully they aren't your super favorites. Even if they are, these are just my opinions of how these books affected me. And also let me know down below what was your most disappointing worst book of the year. I think that is a fascinating question. So you guys, that is what I have. I hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next book video. Okay, take care.